All right, cool. Welcome back to another week of the state of e-commerce. I am TJ Highland, joined as always with Ben Stein. And this week we have Scott Letourneau from Nevada Corporate Planners Sales Tax System. Scott, how's it going?
I'm doing outstanding. How about you guys?
Doing all right, doing all right. So I'm going to jump in with a quick overview of Scott and why we have him here on the state of e-commerce today, and then we'll jump into our content. But a little bit about Scott. He's helped thousands of people launch businesses around the world. He's a go-to expert for e-commerce growth and success. He's helped online sellers expand their sales beyond just U.S. marketplaces and beyond. Working in conjunction with tax attorneys, accountants, he's developed turnkey systems to maximize profits, minimize taxes, and help his clients protect their assets. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about all that good stuff. The world of tax is a little bit of a interesting one. We're going to talk about U.S. expanding into the U.S. when you need to get set up. What does it look like? So I know we have a pretty long agenda of things to talk about. So Ben, why don't we just jump right in?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, TJ. And thanks, Scott, so much for joining us. Really excited to hear your perspective and what you've seen with your clients over the past year.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. I'm looking forward to get into it and to help everybody out who's looking to expand or is already in the U.S. if they're going to make any adjustments in the new year.
So with that, I would love to hear some of your experience, what you've seen in 2020 with your clients, and any of the trends or e-commerce growth or opportunities, and frankly, some of the experiences you've had working with those sellers.
Yeah, I think 2020 has certainly been a challenging year personally for a lot of people, and all that with COVID, of course. But it's also created some opportunities, as you guys all know, and all the listeners. I mean, people have been forced to shop online, right? And my wife is prolific, for buying things online. I mean, we have stuff every day coming from Amazon. And it's interesting because even I find myself looking at different marketplaces we should buy as a consumer. So it's obviously exploding. So we do see a lot more people, getting into the opportunity. And sometimes, it's really never too late because we see that probably continuing. I'm sure a lot of people, as we come out of the pandemic in 2021, hopefully, right, that at some point during the year, that as things turn to quote unquote normal, whatever that may look like, it'll probably be slightly different, right? That a lot of people say, you know what, I'm just going to continue to shop online. So we see tremendous opportunities. With that, I think the biggest challenge I see with clients is, there's so many aspects to getting your business structure, the account set up properly to do this, that a lot of people, rightfully so, think one move ahead, right? It's like, what's the next step? And that's the way you do want to approach things. The challenge in this particular area, there's a lot of gotchas, right? So it's like playing chess. If you're not strategically thinking 3 to 4 moves ahead, you can get handcuffed and end up paying penalties, fines, late fees. Your account's not set up, it's not activated, and a lot of frustration comes out. And over the years that we've worked with entrepreneurs, the biggest thing is we have a tagline, launch with confidence, and confidence is really a psychological advantage in certainty. So we like to help people anticipate what they need to do. And let's be honest, you really don't know the right questions to ask, and you shouldn't be penalized for that, right? So what we do when you work with us, we help you anticipate what you don't know so we can prevent some of these major issues. So there's tremendous opportunity, but there's some challenges is you got to get the right sequence events to really maximize your results.
Yeah, I think we've seen e-commerce, especially here in the United States, just grow tremendously over this past year. Looking at forecasts out the next year and the years prior, the market share of total retail is 20+%, and within the next 5 years, I think we're slated to hit 30% of total retail, which to your point just highlights the enormous opportunity here in the United States. With that, what are some considerations that international sellers should take into account when they're considering expanding to the United States, specifically around, if that is the right decision for them?
Yeah, so if you're looking to expand, you may have started on, another market in the EU or another country, and you're looking to expand to the largest market in the world, right? You want to take advantage of it. So one of the first big decisions is, do you expand in the US with your foreign entity, or do you form a new US entity? And there's some pluses and minuses of each of those moves for that. And on the surface, it seems like it would be less expensive to do the foreign entity. When you combine some other factors like sales tax compliance and some other things, and insurance costs for product liability, once you get to a certain level of sales, $1 million plus in Amazon, for example, then you start to see the numbers get fairly similar. So we like to help people that first decision-making tree when you launch in the US. How do you do that? Now, obviously, we have a lot of people that test out the market selling as a foreign entity, and then they, things are going well. They may have a successful brand in their company, in their own country, and they may want to reduce liability. So they'll say, it's been 8 months, things are really going well on Amazon. I'm on eBay, I set up a Shopify store, and they're crushing it in different areas. And they say, I'd really like to transition to a US entity in the middle of the year. We do a lot of that, but this happens to be, of course, a very popular time because we're at the end of the tax year and we're starting a new year. So a lot of people revisit their goals at this time of the year.
So when these sellers, they look at their goals and they say, okay, great, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to jump. Exactly as you said, I have a successful brand in my home country. What are some of the expectations that sellers can have? I'm assuming here that they can't, wake up on a Monday and by Tuesday start selling in the United States and think that they're going to achieve all their goals they've set out.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So there are some timing things, after you make that first decision about should I sell to a foreign entity, US entity. One of the biggest things when you activate your US account, whether on Amazon, Walmart's a different subject. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But when you do that, you want to make sure you connect all the dots, right? You want to cross the T's, dot the I's. For example, address verification between your Payoneer account, your foreign entity, your billing, all those things need to line up. Obviously, if you form a US entity, that's a critical step. So some of these things can prevent your account from being activated and are unnecessary delays. So those are a couple things that we want to keep in mind as a foreign entity getting ready to sell. And there's some things that once you get ready to launch as a new seller, there's some things we have flexibility with. For example, we might need an exemption certificate sooner than later, but there are a couple of states we still have a little bit of sales tax compliance with that could come into play, the second quarter or maybe even the third quarter down the road, depending upon the time of the year, of course, will have some impact on that. So as for a foreign seller, those are a couple of things you want to keep in mind. Probably the biggest thing that people take for granted is applying for an EIN number, because you can go online and everybody says it's simple because all you got to do is call the IRS. What they're forgetting about, when you call the IRS, you got to answer questions to a form. And when you answer those questions, it casts the die with the IRS. And if you quote unquote make a mistake or you don't fill out the form properly, because it's no big deal, you're just getting an EIN, you may have some unwanted consequences 18 months later in the form of a tax return that maybe you didn't expect in the US, or a significant late fee. There's some forms that in the US are crazy, that one has a late fee of $10,000 on the 5472. So you want to make sure you do it properly, because you can't amend an EIN. You can't say, oops, now I made a mistake. Let me call next week the IRS. Can you just change that in my data? You have to go through a different process and file returns. We work with CPAs to fix these things. But so that's one area that you want to make sure is done properly, is getting that EIN number, because it does set the tone for the IRS in the future.
So it's not an easy process. Sellers gonna have to jump through a little bit of hoops here. It sounds like there's also a strategy too, as far as when you want to launch the United States, because of the serious tax implications here.
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, as I mentioned, it's December, right? So we're getting to the end of the year. We get a lot of requests this time of the year. I want to form a new US LLC. And then the part of our process is, when do you want the start date? Do you want the start date to be December? Do you want the start date to be January? If we start December, we trigger a short year tax return. Well, for a new seller, that could be $1,200, $1,500, coming due in a few months. That is unnecessary if we would have picked January as a start date. And it doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't form the entity now in December. It's just how we fill out the next step. Going back to, the analogy of playing chess, you got to think 3 moves ahead. The good news is we do that for you as you go through the process. And I don't want to say challenge people, but we certainly bring things up. Are you sure you really want to use that date? And no, yes, I need to do something at the end of the year. Okay, that's a different subject. So our team is trained and every order is reviewed to recognize things that don't add up. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And the question for me is, we have Payoneer clients from all over the world. Is the process the same for everyone from every country? Say, excluding anyone on any sanction list, but for a Chinese business and a French business and a Indonesian business, is it all the same, or does that differ?
So in the big picture, the steps are the same. The challenge comes in if there's consequences. So for example, some bigger sellers might have a Hong Kong company and there's not a US tax treaty with Hong Kong. So we work with tax attorneys and we always just upfront, we approach things from a squeaky clean conservative point of view. We never start with an aggressive strategy. But we do have tax attorneys that take a more, I would say, pro-business aggressive point of view, and we can certainly get them involved or refer you to them. You'll pay the fees that are associated to that. So that's the only caveat that comes into play. That's one of the major ones, is that now sometimes sales tax compliance, which is the different subject, it's kind of a matter of, do you have a social security number, ITN, which impacts our ability to file it online or mail it an application, which may be the difference from a few days to 8 weeks to apply. That's the other caveat that comes into play later that may impact, which is probably the same for 95% of international sellers. We know you're not going to have a social ITN, but we show you how to move forward anyways without that.
And I think something you mentioned there is strategy, right? And you've said it twice, and it's having the confidence to launch exactly as your program is here. It's thinking ahead. It's thinking strategically. 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. So as an international seller who's looking to expand in the United States, what are some of the recommendations that you can make based on what you've seen with your clients on expanding too quickly or expanding to Amazon first or Shopify or Walmart, and maybe some of the nuances that those marketplaces have?
Yeah, very good point. So I see a lot of people that will jump to 2 or 3 platforms at one time when perhaps they haven't had a lot of success in their existing business. I mean, business is all about cash flow and profitability. So you really got to be able to manage your profits. I mean, let's be honest, the number one reason to be in a business is profit. It's not sales revenue. It's certainly not losses. It's not stress. Why nobody wants to work 18 hours a day for free, right? And a lot of people end up doing that. So it's all about profitability, right? So that we have to keep in mind. So some people, for example, launch on Amazon, and nothing wrong with it. You see it, of course, on Shopify, and Shopify is a really good model, but they start that also. But they don't realize that those few Shopify sales could trigger another 8 or 10 states you got to register for sales tax, and the compliance in those 8 or 10 states may not only erase the profits from Shopify, but it may cause you to lose money, and then you probably started too soon. So that's one example. Another example would be Walmart versus Amazon. Some want to start both of those. I recently talked to a Canadian seller who wanted to get launched on both of them. Well, there's different parts to it. Walmart, we know that they have a preference to work with US sellers. They like it to look like a US company. They will work with foreign sellers. They have things like even, they ask for a W-9. Well, a W-9 is based upon a US taxpayer. Now that could be a US entity, but there's other components to getting qualified on Walmart that may be different than Amazon. And this particular client happened to be in Canada, which has some different rules on tax treaties with US LLCs than most people set up. So in a consulting session, we went through the complexities, and he ended up deciding, it's usually something like, well, let me just start on Amazon first, then I'll add Walmart later. And that's easy, right? And I'm like, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but okay, so easy is a relative term. So we will walk you through all the steps. Like I can use my same bank account. Okay, if we're going to form a different entity, then we have to run it as a different entity, and there's steps. We can help you do all that, but we just have to think through that process. So we end up, probably rightfully so, because we want our clients to be successful, think a little bit more about what are the steps they're doing. And if they end up at the end of the day deciding it's not the right time for various factors, or the opposite, where they thought to themselves, you know what, I was just going to use my foreign entity, but based upon some of these other components and where my goals are in the next year or two, I think I will move forward with the U.S. entity based upon the costs being very similar. That's a much better decision. More often than not, the conversation goes that way than the former.
Yeah, so it sounds like from your experience you're seeing sellers is that the advice here is just not expand too quickly, because you don't know the cost of expansion. You really don't know, how it's going to impact your business. And you might, be running at a deficit or be working 18 hours for free, which doesn't sound like fun to me either.
Yeah, and I've noticed a pattern is I have a background in psychology and business finance, and I like to study patterns. And I just have to say, if you get a more experienced seller, they understand business costs, fees, they've done profit and loss, they get balance sheets, they kind of understand annual projections. So one of the tools we've worked on over the last couple months goes into a lot of detail about the annual cost, not just the startup cost, because what do most people do? They go online. Okay, I need an LLC. What's the cheapest LLC in form? One is $300. Here's one for $200. Here's one for $99. Here's one for $50. Here's one that's free. Here's one that'll give you $50 if you start. I mean, whatever, So it's all over the board. So that's kind of their criteria. But what's really important is to understand all those costs. If you're behind on sales tax, right? So some of you have been selling here for a couple of years, and you're behind, even though there's the Wayfair South Dakota Supreme Court case in 2018. Even though Amazon, for example, as a marketplace, is collecting most states, some of you are behind. And when you're behind, if you want to sell your company and you want to get maximum value, you don't want to have any surprises when you sign the legal agreements or 6 months later and they find out for whatever reason you weren't in compliance, and you really want to protect your brand, you really want to understand the costs if you're behind versus if you're a brand new seller. Obviously, if you're brand new, you haven't made some mistakes yet, so the costs are less. So we have a comprehensive tool that we're going to be launching in January that kind of goes through all these costs that you can put in your guesstimated annual sales. It'll tell you the states to register. It'll tell you based upon your sales, your filing frequency, your ability to file sales tax returns automatically or not. And if you're behind, it's a whole separate bucket. So we like to get into that amount of detail so we can help people, budget accordingly. And, the more specific your goals are, the more you're going to be on target. So it helps you to be successful. And at the end of the day, that's what we all want. We want you to be successful as you launch to the US.
And, something that we've discussed, I think, a little bit is just the importance of cash flow to a business and understanding, the profitability, the unit economics of your business, making sure that if you're selling a widget for $5, that you have good margins, that you are not running at a deficit. Can you speak to some of the challenges that you've seen with, your customers as maybe they are, operating at a deficit, or, they're struggling for cash or struggling to grow their businesses, and some of the solutions that you've proposed them?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that come to mind that a lot of people don't do. One, they probably rarely think about, and two, they've heard about. So even in the US, the IRS, there's a subject, are you operating a business or a hobby, right? And it's a category that the IRS will audit businesses and say, that really wasn't a business, it was just a hobby. And you're like, hey, I was working 14 hours a day, it felt like a business. That's not the way the IRS looks at it. So one of the things is you got to have financial records, right? And so whether it's you use software like Xero or QuickBooks or some tool or you work in an accounting firm, and there's a lot of great e-commerce accounting firms, you have to know your numbers. And some people have the attitude, I've seen this over the years, well, I'm going to be losing money, and I know I'm not making a profit, so what's the point? that's kind of the whole point of being business. You got to know, okay, when am I going to break even? Is that month 3, month 6? Is it going to be exact? Are you going to be off? Of course you're going to be off. But at least if you have some forecast, you'll be closer than not. So having some financial numbers, expectations, obviously costs. We all know you end up getting more tools. You buy a couple more courses, some more coaching to save you time. You try to avoid some penalties, some of these things. The other thing that almost nobody ever talks about, but I work with one of probably the leading financial experts in the United States in the subject, is one of the biggest things that kills people's business is their personal budget. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but most people, hey, I've been married for 23 years and we do a personal budget every month. It's holiday time. We got 3 kids. It's like, like I say, we got packages coming every day. I'm like, have we reached kind of our goals yet with our budget? So what ends up happening is if you don't have a comprehensive personal budget, when you do have, like in December, a bunch of sellers are pulling out cash out of their business for them personally. And it's because they don't have a comprehensive personal budget, so they spend more. And they end up killing, the goose that laid the golden egg because you took too much cash out because you really weren't in the position to pay yourself yet or as much as you did. Yeah, and I made these mistakes over the years too, and try to calibrate and adjust. And you got to have those conversations, And so I think that's an important component. And there's one thing that you guys do, which is really important, is a lot of people don't think when things are going well, that's the time to get extra financing, because guess what most people do is the opposite. Is when things don't go well in their business, oh crap, now I got to go, let me go to a bank. Who can I get financing from? Well, guess what? Your last quarter profit and loss shows a bunch of losses, or your sales are down 30%. You're trying to explain to the person, well, it's after December. I mean, they go up by 500% November, December, right? So cash flow is important, and getting financing when things are good doesn't mean you just go spend the money in personal things. That's why you need the comprehensive personal budget, but it leverages opportunities for you to take advantage of the marketplace. And if your competitors aren't doing the same thing, they're going to drop like flies, which is good news for you in the end, right?
Similar to what you talk about there, with our cash advance working capital product, you can be located around the world, but only certain countries are allowed from our standard to be advanced to, even if you're selling on Amazon US. So for one of the things that we've talked about, at least, is that could be an extra reason why you would want to register a US business. I would not say that it should be the only reason and the sole purpose, but it is an added advantage. So if you're based in whichever country that we currently don't allow, but if you have a US registered business selling on Amazon US or Walmart US, that could be an added advantage to that solution for you.
Absolutely. Those are one of those many factors. We ran a company for 10 years. We did financing. So that's why we kind of get into these things, because sometimes it's the layer of the onion, what causes, and that's why I go back to certainty and confidence, because if you have certainty and confidence and you set it up properly, that confidence has a ripple effect. I mean, you can literally go listen to any other training and get more out of it. In fact, one of our most popular trainings over the years was how to overcome the pattern of being overwhelmed, because we found when people launch these type of businesses, they get so overwhelmed. So we laid out step by step how to recognize that pattern and get out of it so you can be productive, again, get you back towards profitability. So all these things come into play to help you be successful, which most people won't think about when they might look at us and say, okay, you form entities, what else do you do? Well, we have a interest for you to be successful each year and continue to do business, not to go out of business and go find another 1,000 people. That's not what we want to do.
And for sure. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on in this chat is Walmart, because it kind of sits in its own boat right now with who they're allowing to register for their marketplace. We touched on a little bit earlier about how things are a little bit different with Walmart than, say, some of the other marketplaces. So you want to expand a little bit on that?
Oh, sure. So there's an old saying that says, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck, right? So Walmart, if we reverse engineer, what do they like to do? They like to work with US companies. So you want to, reverse engineer, what are they looking for? What do they want you to accomplish? So for example, on the application, they have a they have a line item for a Dun & Bradstreet number, and a D&B for short, and then a DUNS number you can get for free, but it's really it's the equivalent of a credit score for a business. The score goes from 0 to 100, and there's some other factors how to get a score, and we can go into that some other time, but it says not required, or it's optional. Well, a lot of successful, not starter, but the successful US companies have a DUNS number, because if I want to go check your company out, and a lot of companies look financially naked, so they don't have one. So having a DUNS number makes you more fit into that box, right? You want to have a US address, not just a PO box they can recognize. Our legal address that we have a virtual address service is, if you Google it, it's a large office building with lawyers and other people and financial experts, and it's a real address. We provide a real lease agreement. So and then they want a W-9. Well, if they want a W-9, that in a single member LLC disregarded, owned by a foreign individual or entity, is not going to fill out a W-9. Now, when I usually say these things, some people say to me, well, Scott, I know somebody to fill out a W-9 that way and they got accepted. Okay. It doesn't mean it was done right. It doesn't mean that maybe somebody missed it. And I don't like to do things let's count on people missing it, or you might slip through the cracks. So we like to add up, again, look like a duck, quack like a duck, it's probably a duck. What are they looking for? Reverse engineering. We know they still won't guarantee things. So if we get down to signers, authorized persons, responsible parties, and no social and foreign passports, is that going to be an issue? That could or could not be an issue. If they look at previous company sales experiences or other things, we don't 100% know the level of detail they'll go into compliance, and compliance is a moving target, right? And we can probably expect more compliance, because we know what Amazon or what Walmart's, one of the things they're concerned about is, of course, they don't want sellers selling counterfeit goods. That's why, there was just a week ago, the US government had a new deal with Amazon, most people don't know about, with trademarks, where they're working together. So those are a couple thoughts about Walmart and what it may take. You got to be very patient. That's not I'm going to get signed up and launch in 2 weeks on Walmart. And that could be weeks, if not a couple of months of going through the process. So obviously that's not something, if you're planning revenue coming in 3 weeks, that's going to be disappointing. You're going to get frustrated. So you have to be a little bit realistic about the process. And obviously some people may have more tips, right? Did this. And sometimes it's hard to judge those online tips, because they could give you one tip, but if you miss the 3 other tips, you don't get the same results they did. And we see that happen often.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of circles back, to the point you made in the beginning, is like, when we talk about expansion into the US and which way to do it and what's right and when is your business ready. We talk often about expansion and global expansion, and we talk about Amazon because they have, I think now 10 to 15 different marketplaces in different regions. So when you're entering a new region where there's a lot of unknowns, there's at least a consistency with the platform that you do know. So when you are, say, you're based in Europe and Europe, you want to sell into the US, you can figure out the tax solution, and that might have some hurdles for you along the way. But the act of selling on this platform and the logistics solution and et cetera is going to be second nature. So you can focus on the tax solution. If you're going to open up and try and go into a new marketplace, or D2C on a Shopify, and have to figure out everything from A to Z without even doing the basics of what on a marketplace that you do know, that might be a little risky for you and your business. Might hurt a lot of the top line, and then especially the bottom line for your business. So that's all I think I got for today. Scott, I think as always, we'd like to give you the last word. So to you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. If we can help you out, certainly reach out to our companies. We have 2 main brands. One is NCP, where we take people through the US entity process. You can go to launchwithconfidence.com. We have a lot of different tools, reports, PDFs that summarize some of the things that I've explained to you. So if you share with us your situation, it'll be helpful. If you want to get into a one-on-one consultation with myself, I have different payment options for that. And a lot of times it's valuable. We can do a Zoom call. You can record it. I even have an option where I provide you an email summary, because even though you record it, it's sometimes nice to have, here's step 1 through 10, what you need to take. And if there's a couple issues for you, right? And if you need help with sales tax compliance, I know that's not people's favorite subject, but you got to keep in mind, due to COVID, a lot of states had plans to collect some of the past sales tax, and now due to COVID, their budgets are way off. So we expect, unfortunately, an increase in audits. We've seen California starting to send out notices to sellers, or 18 months ago, or 18 months or older have been selling. So if you need help with sales tax, or you're looking to sell a U.S. brand, you want to make sure you're in compliance, we go through a very thorough analysis. You can go to salestaxsystem.com. We can do sales tax registrations. If you're not sure which states to register, if you need to, we have something called the sales tax nexus analysis. So we have a lot of tools to help out. Just reach out to either website. You'll see our emails to contact us, and just let us know your situation. We'll get you in the right direction. My team is very thorough, very detailed, will be able to absolutely help you out.
And as always, like we say, we bring on, subject matter experts and our partners in this e-commerce world, because this is not something that you as a seller or you as a business should have to do alone. Sales tax is incredibly daunting. I know from a personal standpoint, TurboTax makes things easy, but it's still daunting. So I could only imagine being a foreign entity and trying to figure that out. A whole new set of laws, a whole new set of rules. You just touched on Nexus, which opens a whole nother box of what that looks like. So if anybody has any questions, absolutely reach out to Scott and his team. Like you said, launchwithconfidence.com or salestaxsystems.com, and they'll be able to help you. So for Ben and myself, Scott, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate you. You guys do an awesome job over there at Payoneer. Appreciate everything you're doing to help out our community and help people be successful. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Bye, guys.